The missing. In the late 90s, I was living with my parents in a small town. I had just applied to study at university. Becoming a lawyer was my dream, and I had my family's support. My father would bring me books that his boss gave him for me, so at least I would start university with some knowledge of law. The acceptance letter would arrive in 1 or 2 months, as I was just finishing my last year of high school. One afternoon, my best friend invited me to play soccer with some guys from his street, and I agreed. We were on vacation, and I wanted to enjoy myself before being chained to university life. After the game, we noticed a lot of people running in the same direction. Before heading home, I decided to check it out with my best friend and the other guys. We followed the crowd, and when we asked what was going on, we were told that a boy had gone missing. It wasn't yet confirmed whether it was an abduction or if he had gotten lost in the forest surrounding the town. The police started searching immediately, as it seemed he had been missing for over 24 hours. His family thought he was at a friend's house, but that wasn't the case. Everyone in town helped with the search, even my parents. My mom was friends with the boy's mother, didn't want to just stand by. I joined them and reunited with my best friend that night. The search continued into the early morning, but there were no signs or traces of Miguel. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Speculation began. Many said it was an abduction and that he had already been taken far away, making the search in town and its surroundings completely futile. Others suggested he might be hidden in one of the houses, and Miguel's family urged the police to search them all, a desperate measure, but the police refused. They said they needed a lead to conduct selective searches, as a mass search of the town would be unethical, not to mention the trouble they'd get into without proper authorization. The search for Miguel continued for 2 more days, but not even the slightest clue appeared. The rumor that he was no longer in town or nearby gained strength, and the police eventually gave up. Even 2 detectives came, but they left empty-handed. No one had seen Miguel since he left home, which complicated matters, and his friends claimed to know nothing about him. It seemed he hadn't told any of them what he planned to do or whether he was leaving town. His family dismissed the idea that he'd run away, as he hadn't taken any clothes or money. It didn't make sense for him to leave just like that. His sister was devastated. We saw her on the street putting up missing person posters of Miguel. I wanted to approach her, but I decided not to. I'd seen her several times at school, but I never approached her. If we ever exchanged words, I don't remember. I watched her cry as she put up the posters with her brother's photo. I couldn't imagine the anguish my parents would feel if something like that happened to me. It wasn't fair for anyone to go through that, and I truly hoped Miguel was okay, or at least alive. One night I sat with several friends in a park, and out of nowhere we started talking about Miguel's disappearance. It was very strange. This wasn't something that happened often in our town. In fact, to know the last time someone disappeared, we'd have to ask the elders, as not even my parents could remember. That's what alarmed people, and most began going to bed much earlier. The streets were deserted after 8 o'clock at night. Miguel's disappearance put everyone on high alert, and my parents got upset whenever I went out at night with friends, even if it was just to a park. At that moment, one of my friends said that if Miguel was still near the town, or at least in the forest, he had to be in Ferrer's house. It was the first time I had heard that name, so I asked what house that was, and why Miguel would be there. That's when they told me that Ferrer's house was a place where all sorts of paranormal activities occurred, and no one came out alive once they entered. The first thing I said when I heard that was that the police should go investigate the house, but then they told me it could only be found by someone who got lost in the forest. And frankly, Miguel had a habit of smoking weed, so there was a possibility that he got lost, found Ferrer's house, and somehow got trapped there where no one could find him. My friends had always been daring, and honestly, I thought some of them would volunteer to find Miguel in Ferrer's house, but they didn't. They said trying to find that house was too much, even for them. If Miguel got trapped and couldn't escape, there was no guarantee they would. To be honest, they were right, and it seemed I was the only one curious to see that house, even from a distance. But for that, I'd have to get lost. We kept talking about it, and then they told me that the last person who entered Ferrer's house was an old man named Christopher. My friends told me that he was the only one who had managed to get out, but it was curious because no one remembered the last time someone disappeared in the town, so I mentioned that to them. They told me that people did appear, but not alive. The last one to die was Amanda Higgins. She entered the house and was found in the lake half a kilometer from the town, drowned and with several broken bones. No one knew how they did that to her. Her family moved away from the town after her death, and it was more than understandable. Again, They made it clear to me that if Miguel had entered that house, he would never return, at least not alive, so all his family could do was hope he would never appear again, or that his body would be found. How terrible it had to be that way, that's what I thought. Was there really no salvation for Miguel? I refused to believe that. There had to be something that could be done for him, but no matter how much I said it, no one volunteered to go to Ferrer's house. Ultimately, they told me that it was impossible to know for sure if he was in the house or if he met a different fate. The only way to confirm it was by going to that house, but if I decided to go, none of them would accompany me, and the most likely scenario was that I would be the next to disappear. That night we said goodbye, and I went home with a bitter taste and incredible helplessness. The thought that Miguel was still alive crossed my mind. Somehow it had to be true. Something told me so, but I lacked the courage to go to Ferrer's house alone. I proposed it to my best friend before heading home, but he refused. He said it wasn't just because it was too dangerous, but because he had never interacted with Miguel. He wasn't our friend, so he couldn't take such a risk for a stranger. I didn't agree with what he said, but I respected him. Deep down, I knew he was right. I couldn't imagine him disappearing because of me, and I would never forgive myself for that. The next day, I was skating through the town streets. It was around 4 in the afternoon, as I recall, and once again I saw Miguel's sister putting up posters. Many had been torn down by the townspeople themselves, it was noticeable. She insisted and put up new ones over the ones that had been torn down. This time I did approach her and helped her put them up. Her eyes were red, and dried tears streaked her cheeks. She had clearly been suffering from her brother's disappearance. Talking with her, she told me that she and Miguel were twins, which is why they didn't seem to have much of an age difference, as they were the same age. She confessed that she knew Miguel smoked and such, but disappearing was unthinkable. She told me that she had contacted his friends, and they told her that he had no problems with anyone and didn't owe money. There was no one in town who wanted to harm him. I expected her to mention the idea that her brother might not be in the town or even nearby, but her hope and faith were so strong that she didn't even bring it up. I couldn't understand her. I've been an only child all my life, so I don't know what it's like to have a missing sibling, but I was empathetic and imagined if something like that happened to my mother. If there was even the slightest chance that they were in Ferrer's house, I would undoubtedly go after them. I debated whether or not to tell her about that house, and the reason was that I couldn't confirm if Miguel was there. If I were wrong, I would be sending that girl to a place from which she would never return, at least not alive. Not to mention that several days had already passed. Miguel might already be gone, and going to search for him at that house could be useless. The battle in my head to figure out what was right and what I should do at that moment was incredible. While helping her, I noticed she looked a bit dizzy and pale. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she hadn't eaten in 2 days. I suggested we take the posters to my house, which was nearby, and that she eat something. She agreed. My mom welcomed her warmly, as she was the daughter of her friend. She prepared something for her to eat, and after trying to comfort her, she left us alone. By then, I had already made a decision. I would tell her about Ferrer's house. So I did. Like me, she had no knowledge of the house, knew nothing about it. When I mentioned the possibility that Miguel might be there, she immediately said she would go as soon as she finished eating. I tried to make her see reason, and that's when she asked me to accompany her. I was speechless, but she kept trying to convince me. She said that if someone was behind all of this, the two of us could do something. And if Miguel was alive, it would be worth it. If this were resolved, maybe no one else would disappear at Ferrer's house. Another flood of thoughts overwhelmed me. I even began to feel some fear, but I saw in her eyes that she was determined to do whatever it took to rescue her brother. So I gathered my courage and told her yes, that I would accompany her. But just in case, I suggested she try to get something to defend ourselves with, and we would do it the next day since it was about to get dark. That night I went to my best friend's house and told him what I was going to do the next day with Miguel's twin sister. He tried to persuade me in every possible way not to go, but I had already decided. If I were Miguel, I would have wanted someone to come for me. There was a possibility that he was alive. Something told me he was. Honestly, I didn't expect my best friend to offer to come with me. I knew he wouldn't, but that was okay. At least someone would know where we were going in case I disappeared like Miguel. We talked a lot, and it was already late, and we said goodbye with a strong hug when I left. It didn't feel like a final farewell. I had no intentions of dying after all. The next morning after breakfast, I got ready and went to Miguel's sister's house. She was already waiting for me. She told her parents that she was going to put up more posters with me, but as soon as we entered the forest, we left them near a tree that we could recognize. That would also help us since the posters would serve as a reference for when we returned, but the thing was we needed to get lost to find the house. I still believe that wasn't entirely necessary. If the house was in the forest, we could find it, plain and simple. The truth was that neither the police nor anyone who went out searching for Miguel had found it. We had a lot of faith and were very optimistic to think that we would succeed. About an hour passed, and I wasn't sure if we were lost or not. In my mind, I could still trace the way back, but I wasn't certain. That's when I told Sophia that we needed to cross paths several times as we moved forward. That way, we would get lost. The house wasn't appearing anywhere, and if something happened, she had the weapon I told her to get. I didn't know where she got it from, and I didn't ask. The important thing was that she had it. We did what I suggested, and then the unexpected happened. We had left a box with the posters that would help find Miguel at a tree behind us, but many meters back, maybe a kilometer. The surprise was that in front of us we found not one, but 2 boxes with posters. We checked them, and yes, they were Miguel's. We didn't know if it was the same tree, but the boxes were identical. Sophia got a bit scared, and that's when she told me she was thinking of going back. It was too late for that. Thinking that this was the tree we had seen at the beginning, we followed what we believed was the route back to the village, but we didn't make it. We found the tree again, and instead of 2 boxes, there were 3 this time. We were indeed lost. In fact, it seemed as if we weren't even in the same forest. Why were more boxes appearing? Was it a mirage? An illusion? We didn't know. We kept walking, and then we couldn't find the tree, the boxes, or anything. We were completely lost. Even trying to look through the trees, we couldn't tell where we were in the forest. There was only one thing that could happen at that moment: finding Ferrer's house. To avoid getting too anxious, I decided to start a conversation with Sophia. I asked her what she planned to study, and things like that. She told me she wanted to be a biology teacher, but had already been rejected twice by the universities. Her next application was that very month, and she hoped for good news. Minutes passed, and we were closer to reaching another village than to returning to ours. By that time, we both knew we wouldn't make it back. There was no way. We were so lost that I was internally scared of finding nothing and starving to death. We hadn't brought any food, not even water. We were so focused on finding Ferrer's house and Miguel that we overlooked everything that could happen to us, like that. We were silent for a while, and then we heard footsteps behind us. We quickly turned around, but there was nothing. We went to check those trees behind us, but no one was there. Sophia said it might be Miguel, but I told her that was highly unlikely. If it really were him, he would have already approached us, at least. He would have recognized his sister, but no. I told her it was most likely an animal. A squirrel, maybe. But I said it to keep her from panicking. I was already very scared by that point, and I didn't believe what we had heard was an animal. We kept walking, and then beside us, we heard very loud footsteps, and then they started running. We didn't know what to do, and out of fear we stayed where we were, looking around between the trees, trying to spot something, but we saw nothing. We heard the footsteps, but we couldn't see anyone. It sounded as if several people were running around us, but we were more concerned about the fact that we couldn't see absolutely anything. At that moment, Sophia grabbed my arm tightly and said that the best thing to do was to run. I didn't think twice, and we ran as fast as we could. We didn't care about anything behind us or where we were heading. We just wanted to get to a part of the forest where those footsteps couldn't be heard. Several minutes later, we got tired and stopped. Even after running so much, we didn't manage to find Ferrer's house. How was it possible that those who got lost found it so quickly? We were more than lost and had no luck. With nothing else to do, we leaned against one of the trees to rest. We no longer heard footsteps or anything. We thought we were safe, and we relaxed a bit. I know we shouldn't have. There were many dangers in that forest that could have harmed us, but for us, it was a great relief to have silence again. Sophia leaned on my shoulder, and I got the impression that she wanted to fall asleep. I wanted to tell her that we couldn't afford that luxury, but anyway, we were going to keep walking toward a direction we didn't know. I thought that the best thing that could happen to us was for someone living nearby to find us and guide us back to the village, but that was already asking too much. Only God knew where we were and what would happen to us. That's when it happened. I heard footsteps slowly approaching, but this time it was worse. I could actually see someone. He came to stand right in front of us, about 4 or 5 meters away. I didn't recognize him. I'd never seen him before. I decided to wake Sophia, and when she saw the boy, she let out a scream that could probably be heard throughout the entire forest. Then she shouted a name. Miguel. That was her brother, but before she could stand up to go to him, he ran off. Sophia and I tried to catch up with him, but he was too fast for us. Soon after, we lost sight of him. We could no longer follow him, but what seemed like a path became visible, as if the trees were parting to form a trail. I told Sophia that this was a bad idea, and that the person we saw wasn't her brother. It couldn't be. If he were really lost, he would have been overjoyed just to see her, but his gaze was cold, as if he were an empty shell. I couldn't convince her not to go down that path, and unfortunately, I refused to let her go alone. If we got separated, the chances of never returning would increase. I had no other choice, so we walked down the path. With a bitter tone, I told her that what we were going to find was more than obvious. That path was going to lead us straight to Ferrer's house. It was clear as day. I asked her again what she intended to do if we found her brother, and he acted like he did minutes before. She said maybe he was confused and that's why he didn't recognize her. Besides, she was convinced that just talking to him would bring him back to his senses. I didn't have much faith in that, and then the unthinkable happened. Through the trees, we could see a wooden house, a little ways off. That was Ferrer's house. Sophia was delighted to see it, saying that her brother was there, but I knew we were making a grave mistake. At that moment, I thought that if what my friend said was true about all kinds of paranormal activities happening in that house, then it was very likely that an evil entity had possessed Miguel's body to lure us in. I couldn't describe how regretful I was for having told Sophia about that house, and worse, for agreeing to accompany her. Those had been two mistakes that would cost me dearly. We reached the house. Given how long we had been in the forest and the look of the sky, I knew it was only a matter of time before it got dark. That would be a problem. I told her we should go inside, and if Miguel wasn't there, we would leave immediately. She agreed. At least she was aware that we couldn't stay long inside that house. With each step I took towards that place, I felt my heart racing more clearly. The creaking of the stairs with each footstep seemed to last forever. We opened the door without any trouble. It wasn't locked, as expected. The sunlight illuminated the interior very well, which was good. The living room was tidy, with no trace of dust. The house gave the impression that it had been cleaned and tidied up recently. Sophia called out to her brother several times, shouting his name, but there was no response. There was no one in the living room or the kitchen. We still needed to check the upstairs bedrooms, and if we didn't find Miguel, we were going to run out of that house. Before going up the stairs, I saw a small wooden table with a photo on it. It was of an elderly couple. I checked the back of the frame, and written on it was, George and Jane Ferrer. That's when I understood why the house was called that. It was the owner's last name. We went upstairs to the bedrooms and entered the one closest to us. A bed, closet, dresser, and 2 nightstands. Nothing out of the ordinary. If the house was scary, it was more because of the name it carried, but it didn't feel as heavy as I had imagined. For a moment, I thought this wasn't Ferrer's house, but the portrait downstairs confirmed it. The next room was the same as the previous one, so we only had the one at the end left. The doorknob wouldn't budge, not even when I forced it. I used all my strength, but it didn't move an inch. At that moment, we heard a noise behind us. We quickly turned around, and on the floor was the portrait I had seen downstairs. I wondered, how did it get there? I picked it up, and it looked normal until I checked the back again. Next to the couple's names, there was a date. It was the date the photo had been taken, but I dropped it when I saw it. It had been taken 100 years ago, so it was more than obvious that the couple was dead. I turned my gaze toward the door that wouldn't open, and I immediately pushed Sophia away. Something told me that the bodies of those 2 elderly people were on the other side. I told Sophia that we had to get out of there, and she nodded. We ran towards the stairs, but then something strange happened. Both she and I got dizzy, and we couldn't see the steps clearly. I thought that if I went down like that, I might fall, even while holding onto the railings. My vision was getting more and more blurred, so I grabbed Sophia's hand to avoid getting separated and went down, holding onto the railings with the other hand. I went down so slowly that I assumed Sophia was following my pace. She didn't say a word, not even when I spoke to her. Soon after, I finally reached the first floor, and my vision returned to normal after rubbing my eyes several times. When I turned to look at Sophia, my heart stopped, and my soul left my body for a few seconds. Next to me wasn't Miguel's sister, but the elderly woman from the portrait, Jane Ferrer. She was staring directly into my eyes, wearing the same clothes as in the photo. She didn't say a word, and it wasn't necessary. Seeing her shocked me so much that I fell backward, and from her body, only her eyes moved, following me. I screamed Sophia's name several times, but there was no response. I don't know where I found the courage, but I asked Jane Ferrer what she had done to Sophia. She didn't answer, and overcome by fear, I ran toward the door to escape. Just before I got out, I heard a scream coming from the second floor of the house. When I turned around, Jane Ferrer was no longer there. She had disappeared. I knew that if I stayed any longer, I would be the next one screaming. My legs wouldn't respond, and my mind went blank. I couldn't think of what to do, and Sophia's screams grew louder. I closed my eyes for a moment, bit my tongue, and ran back up the stairs to get Sophia. I entered the room from which the screams were coming and found her lying on the bed, crying, screaming, and with several cuts on her arms and legs. She was struggling against something I couldn't see. It was invisible to me, but she seemed to be holding it with her hands and trying to push it away. When I reached her and got her off the bed, she stopped struggling. Her eyes were filled with terror, and in the midst of her sobs, she told me she wanted to leave, to get out of that house. She could barely walk, so she leaned on my shoulder to help her out of the room. When we reached the hallway, I saw a man standing on the stairs, watching us. It was George Ferrer. Upon seeing him, I started crying. I begged him to let us go, telling him we hadn't done anything wrong. Sophia closed her eyes when she saw him, only hearing me pleading with someone who should have been dead to let us leave the house. The man didn't take his eyes off me, and then screams began to echo from downstairs. I didn't know whose voice it was, but when I saw Sophia start to tremble and cry again, I knew it was her brother. I pleaded with George Ferrer to let us go, and he descended the stairs. When I peeked to look at him, he was gone. I told Sophia there was a chance to get out. She opened her eyes, but only looked at the floor, refusing to lift her gaze. When we reached the first floor again, I glanced toward the kitchen, and the image I saw will never leave my mind. It was Miguel, Sophia's brother, hanging by his neck with a rope, his eyes missing. All I could do was tell Sophia to close her eyes, and fortunately she did. We left the house, and as we moved further away, Sophia's wounds began to disappear. We walked until she could do so on her own. We didn't speak for several minutes, and then she asked me the question I had been dreading. She asked me what I had seen in the living room. I simply told her that I had seen her brother. When she asked if I saw him alive, I replied that I hadn't, and then we fell silent. As night fell, we found the box with the posters of Miguel. Based on its position, I figured out the way back to the town, and a few hours later, we made it. We were back. Sophia had red liquid on her clothes, but no wounds. Explaining what had happened to her was going to be difficult. We arrived at my house, which was the closest one to where we had re-entered the town. I invited her in, but she refused. She didn't even let me walk her home. She said everything was fine and thanked me for accompanying her. Her eyes said it all. She was devastated. Any hope of seeing her brother alive again had vanished. I got home very dirty, but luckily my parents didn't notice. I quickly showered and went to my room. The next day, news spread through the town. They had found Miguel's body. They had taken it to his parents' house. When I heard, I ran to see him. The family had been provided with a coffin to place the body in, and that's where I saw him. His eyes were closed, so I wondered if someone had closed them after noticing he didn't have any. Later, I overheard that when they found the body, the sparkle in his eyes hadn't faded, and I was shocked. Was that true? I had seen Miguel's body without eyes, covered in red liquid. Why did he have eyes now? Who did I really see? When Sophia came down from her room, she approached me and confessed that she felt the person on the table wasn't her brother. She asked if that's how he looked when I saw him, and forced to tell the truth, I answered no. She said that perhaps we did have the chance to save her brother's life, but we were so terrified by what was happening to us that we could only think of escaping the house. I had no words. Months later, I went to university, but by then, I had become very close friends with Sophia. Curiously, she moved to the city where I was studying, and we saw each other several times a week. That experience will never leave us. She had to see a psychologist because she felt guilty for not being able to save her brother. I've always wondered if that was Miguel's real body, and if it wasn't, where is the real one? Dear friends, thank you very much for joining me in tonight's stories. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of the stories we upload each week. Leave me your thumbs up, your comment, and if you enjoyed this horror story, share it with all your friends. That would help me a lot. See you in the next episode of Dark Secret.